The moment Victoria signed the divorce papers, her husband smiled. Not a sad smile, not a regretful one. A smile of pure, undisguised relief. 23 years of marriage, dissolved in 30 seconds of ink on paper. And all Jonathan Reed could do was smile like a man who just closed the most profitable deal of his life. He didn't even look at her face. He looked past her through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his attorney's office, toward the Manhattan skyline that stretched out like a kingdom he'd conquered. Finally, he muttered under his breath. Victoria heard it. She was meant to. She sat across from him in a chair that cost more than most people's monthly rent, wearing a dress she'd bought with money from an account that no longer existed, one he'd emptied 3 weeks ago without telling her. Her hands trembled as she set down the pen, but she kept her face still, neutral. She'd learned that skill long ago. How to disappear while still sitting in the room. Jonathan's attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Holbrook, slid the papers into a leather folder with the efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. The settlement is final, Patricia said, her voice clipped and professional. Mrs. Reed will vacate the premises within 14 days. All personal belongings only. No furniture, no art, no vehicles registered under Reed Enterprises. Victoria's throat tightened, but she nodded. And the prenuptial agreement holds, Patricia continued, glancing at Jonathan with something that looked almost like admiration. Given that Mrs. Reed brought no financial assets into the marriage and contributed no documented income during the union, she is entitled to no alimony, no property division, and no stake in Reed Enterprises or its subsidiaries. Jonathan leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. He looked like a king presiding over a sentencing. I'm being generous, Victoria. I could have made this much harder. She finally met his eyes. They were cold. Blue and cold, like ice over deep water. She wondered when they'd changed. Or if they'd always been this way and she'd simply chosen not to see it. Generous, she repeated softly. You'll have 2 weeks, he said. That's more than fair. 2 weeks to leave the only home she'd known for 2 decades. 2 weeks to pack up a life she'd built with her own hands while he built skyscrapers and bank accounts. 2 weeks to become invisible. She stood. The chair didn't make a sound on the thick carpet. Nothing in this office made sound unless Jonathan wanted it to. I'll be out in 1 week, she said. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Surprise? Suspicion? She couldn't tell anymore. Good, he turned to Patricia. Make sure security is notified. I don't want any drama. Victoria walked to the door. Her heels, expensive ones, a gift from him 3 Christmases ago, clicked softly against the floor. She paused with her hand on the handle. Jonathan? He looked up, irritated. What? Do you remember the day we bought the estate? His expression flickered. What does that have to do with anything? Do you remember what I said? When we stood in the entryway for the first time? He sighed, impatient. Victoria, I have a 4 o'clock meeting. I said it felt like coming home. Her voice was steady now, almost curious. Do you remember what you said back? Silence. You said, it's just a house, Victoria. Real estate. Don't get sentimental, she smiled then, small and private. You were right. It is just a house. She left before he could respond. The elevator ride down 63 floors felt like falling. Victoria watched the numbers descend 62, 61, 60, and wondered if this was what dying felt like. Slow, inevitable, strangely peaceful. When the doors opened to the lobby, she stepped out into a world that suddenly felt too bright, too loud, too real. Manhattan in October. Tourists and businessmen and coffee vendors and dogs on leashes. Life continuing as if hers hadn't just ended. She had no car. Jonathan had taken the driver. She had no apartment. Jonathan owned the penthouse and the brownstone and the summer house in the Hamptons. She had $847 in her personal checking account, all that remained after he defrozen their joint accounts. For legal purposes, she had 1 suitcase in a storage locker in Queens. She had the clothes on her back, and she had one other thing. Something Jonathan didn't know about. Something he'd never thought to ask about because men like Jonathan Reed didn't ask questions. They made statements, they issued commands. They assumed. And assumptions, Victoria had learned, could be dangerous. She hailed a cab and gave an address in Brooklyn. The driver glanced at her in the rearview mirror, this woman in a designer dress asking to go to a neighborhood where designer dresses didn't usually go, but he didn't comment. As Manhattan receded behind her, Victoria pulled out her phone. It was an old one, a cheap Android she'd bought with cash 2 years ago. Jonathan didn't know about this phone. He didn't know about a lot of things. She opened her contacts and scrolled to a name, G. Morrison, attorney at law. She typed a message. It's done. He signed. Proceed with phase 2. The response came quickly. Are you sure you want to do this? Victoria looked out the window at the city passing by. Brooklyn, with its brownstones and corner bodegas and people who lived real lives, not carefully curated ones. People who loved and fought and struggled and survived. She typed, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. 23 years earlier, Victoria Hayes had been a different person, young, hopeful, stupidly, recklessly in love. She'd met Jonathan at a charity gala in Boston, where she was working as an event coordinator for a nonprofit that built schools in developing countries. It wasn't glamorous work-long hours, terrible pay, endless logistics nightmares, but it mattered. She'd felt like she was doing something real, something good. Jonathan had been a guest speaker that night. 29 years old, already making waves in real estate development, already being called the next big thing by business magazines. He'd donated $50,000 to the nonprofit on the spot, and when Victoria had approached him afterward to thank him, he'd looked at her like she was the most fascinating person in the room. You organized all this? He'd asked, gesturing to the elegant ballroom, the silent auction tables, the carefully orchestrated program. With a team, she'd said modestly. No. He'd shaken his head, studying her with those blue eyes that seemed to see everything. I've been to 100 of these events. This one is different. Someone cared about the details. That was you. She'd blushed. Actually blushed, like a teenager. They talked for 2 hours. He'd asked about her work, her life, her dreams. He'd listened, really listened in a way that made her feel seen. When he'd asked for her number, she'd given it without hesitation. The courtship had been intense. Flowers delivered to her tiny apartment in Cambridge. Late-night phone calls that stretched until dawn. Weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard and Newport. He'd been charming, attentive, generous. He'd made her feel like the center of his universe. 6 months later, he'd proposed. Her mother had been concerned. It's very fast, sweetheart. Are you sure you know him? I know he loves me, Victoria had said, believing it completely. The wedding had been beautiful, small, intimate, exactly what she'd wanted. They'd honeymooned in Tuscany, staying in a villa that overlooked rolling hills of vineyards. He'd held her hand as they watched sunsets and talked about the future. I'm going to build something incredible, he'd told her one evening, wine glass in hand. An empire. But I need you with me, Victoria. You make me better. She believed that too. The first year of marriage had been good. Jonathan was working constantly, building Reed Enterprises from a small development firm into something larger. But when he came home, he was present. He asked about her day. He remembered the names of her friends. He laughed at her jokes. They'd bought a modest house in Westchester, 3 bedrooms, a nice yard, nothing extravagant. Victoria had continued working at the nonprofit, and Jonathan had supported her. Or so she'd thought. The cracks started showing in year 2. You're working yourself to death for $35,000 a year, Jonathan had said one night over dinner. It doesn't make sense, Victoria. It's not about the money, she'd replied. It's about making a difference. You could make a bigger difference if you help me. I'm trying to build something here. I need someone I can trust to manage the foundation, handle the PR, work with clients' wives. He'd reached across the table, taking her hand. We're a team, remember? Let's build this together. She'd quit her job a week later. At first it had felt like the right decision. She'd thrown herself into supporting Jonathan's business organizing events, managing donations to various charities, all tax-deductible. Jonathan had been careful to note, schmoozing with the wives of investors and partners. She'd been good at it. People had liked her. She'd made Jonathan look good. But something had shifted. Subtly at first, then more obviously. Jonathan stopped asking about her day because her day revolved around his work. He stopped remembering her friends' names because she'd gradually lost touch with them, too busy with his schedule, his needs, his ambitions. He stopped laughing at her jokes because they were having fewer conversations that weren't about business. Year 5, they'd bought the estate. It was a sprawling property in Connecticut, 50 acres. A main house with 12 bedrooms, a guest house, stables, gardens, a view of Long Island Sound. It was ostentatious and ridiculous and far too large for 2 people. But Jonathan had been insistent. This is what success looks like, he'd said as they'd walked through the empty rooms on their first visit. This is what we've earned. We? She'd asked quietly. He'd looked at her sharply. Yes, we? You think I could have done this without you? You've been essential, Victoria. She'd wanted to believe him. They'd moved in 6 months later, after extensive renovations that Jonathan had overseen personally. Victoria had been allowed to decorate. He'd been generous about that, and she'd spent months selecting furniture, art, fabrics. She created something beautiful. A home, not just a house. But it had never felt like coming home. Year 10, she'd suggested having children. Not yet, Jonathan had said. The business is at a critical stage. I need to focus. Year 12. The market is unstable. Let's wait. Year 15. We're not young anymore, Victoria. It's probably too late anyway. Year 17. Why are we even discussing this? We're fine as we are. She'd stopped asking. Somewhere along the way, she couldn't pinpoint exactly when Victoria had realized she'd become a ghost. She existed in Jonathan's life, but she didn't matter. She was a useful accessory, like the art on the walls or the luxury cars in the garage. Beautiful, expensive, easily replaced. She'd started noticing other things too, the way he looked at younger women at parties. The late-night business meetings that smelled like perfume. The credit card statements showing purchases at jewelry stores when she hadn't received any gifts. The phone calls he took in his study with the door locked. She'd never confronted him. What would have been the point? He would have denied it, or worse, admitted it and blamed her. You've let yourself go, Victoria. You're not the woman I married. What do you expect when you have nothing interesting to say? So she'd stayed quiet. She'd played her role, the perfect wife, the gracious hostess, the elegant decoration, and she'd started planning. It had begun 3 years ago, almost accidentally. She'd been going through old files in the estate's library boxes of documents from the property purchase that Jonathan had never bothered to look at when she'd found something interesting. A deed, old, faded, from 1987. She'd almost thrown it away, almost. But something had made her pause, read it more carefully. And that's when she'd understood. Jonathan had made a mistake. A crucial, arrogant, expensive mistake he'd assumed. And Victoria, quiet, invisible Victoria, had seen an opportunity. She'd spent the next 3 years preparing, carefully, methodically. She'd consulted attorneys, not the fancy Manhattan ones who played golf with Jonathan, but scrappy, hungry ones in Brooklyn and Queens who understood nuance and loopholes. She'd gathered documents, she'd created paper trails, she'd built a case, all while playing the perfect wife. All while waiting for Jonathan to show his true colors. She hadn't expected him to be quite so cruel about it. The affair with his 26-year-old assistant, Rebecca, had been obvious for months. Victoria had pretended not to notice. But then one night, Jonathan had come home and simply announced, I want a divorce. No explanation, no apology. Just a statement of fact. I've already spoken to my attorneys, he'd continued, pouring himself a scotch in the study while Victoria stood in the doorway. You'll be taken care of. Don't worry. But let's be realistic, you haven't worked in 20 years, you have no assets, and the prenup is ironclad. You'll get nothing from the business or properties, but I'll give you 2 weeks to move out. That's generous. Generous, she'd echoed, the same word she'd used later in Patricia's office. Rebecca is moving in next month, he'd added casually, as if discussing a furniture delivery. I'd appreciate it if you could be gone before then. Less awkward for everyone. That's when Victoria had known. Not suspected. Known. Jonathan didn't love her. Perhaps he never had. She'd been useful, and now she wasn't, so she was being discarded like an old appliance that had outlived its warranty. I'll need a few days to process this, she'd said quietly. Of course. I'm not a monster, he'd actually said that. Take your time. Just be reasonable. She'd been very reasonable. She'd signed the papers without protest. She'd agreed to every term. She'd acted exactly like the broken, defeated woman he expected her to be. Because men like Jonathan Reed never looked closely at broken things. They stepped over them and moved on. The apartment in Brooklyn was nothing like the Connecticut estate. 800 square feet, 3rd floor walk-up. Radiator that clanked at night. Neighbors who played music too loud and argued in languages Victoria didn't speak. It was perfect. She'd rented it 2 years ago under her maiden name, Hayes, paying cash month by month through a property management company that didn't ask questions. Jonathan had never known about it. He'd never thought to look, why would he? His wife didn't have any money. His wife didn't have any secrets. His wife was a cipher, a blank space in his life that he filled with his own assumptions. Victoria unlocked the door and stepped inside. The space was sparse of futon, a small table, a kitchenette with a hot plate, but it was hers, truly hers. Jonathan had never set foot here, never touched these walls, never poisoned this air with his presence. She set down her purse and pulled out the cheap phone. 12 missed calls from a number she didn't recognize. Jonathan's new assistant, probably. Or his attorney. Or Rebecca, maybe, calling to gloat. She deleted them all without listening. Instead, she called her own attorney. Gerald Morrison answered on the first ring. Victoria. Tell me you didn't change your mind. Gerald Morrison was 67 years old, African-American, and had been practicing law in Brooklyn for 43 years. He'd handled divorces, property disputes, tenant rights cases, and had a reputation for being absolutely relentless. He'd also been Victoria's father's lawyer back when her father was still alive. I didn't change my mind, Victoria said. She moved to the window, looking out at the Brooklyn street below. Evening was falling. People were coming home from work, carrying groceries, walking dogs, living ordinary lives. I'm ready. You understand what this means? Once we proceed, there's no going back. Jonathan will fight. He'll fight hard. He has resources you don't. He has resources, Victoria agreed. But he doesn't have what I have. The deed. The deed. Gerald was quiet for a moment. She could hear him breathing, thinking. I've been a lawyer a long time, Victoria. I've seen a lot of things, but this is something special. Poetic, even. Are you sure you want to do this? You could negotiate quietly. Force a better settlement. Walk away with something. I don't want something, Victoria said. I want everything. Everything. He took 23 years of my life, Gerald. He took my career, my friends, my dignity. He made me small, invisible, and when he was done with me, he threw me away like trash. Her voice was steady, but her hand gripped the phone tightly. So yes, I want everything. All right then. She could hear the smile in Gerald's voice. Let's burn his kingdom down. The next morning, Victoria woke early. She made coffee on the hot plate, cheap instant coffee that tasted like regret, nothing like the artisanal beans from the estate, and sat at the small table with her laptop. She had work to do. First, she checked her secure email. The one Jonathan didn't know about. There were 3 messages from Gerald's paralegal, Diane Chun, a fierce woman in her 30s who'd done most of the research for Victoria's case. Diane subject. Property records confirmed Victoria. Attached are the certified copies of the 1987 deed and the subsequent transfer documents. Everything checks out. The land ownership is clear, uncontested, and on record with the county. Jonathan's purchase in 2002 only included the structures and improvements, not the underlying land. His attorneys missed it completely. We also confirm that the property has appreciated significantly. Current estimated value of the land alone, separate from structures, $47 million. Diane Victoria read the email twice, then opened the attachments. The deed was there, scanned in high resolution. The property description. The legal language. All of it legal. All of it binding. All of it hers. The land beneath Jonathan's precious estate, the 50 acres of prime Connecticut real estate with Long Island Sound views, belonged to Victoria Hayes, not Victoria Reed, her maiden name. Because she'd inherited it from her father 25 years ago, when she was 23 years old and Jonathan Reed was just a charming man at a charity gala. Her father, Thomas Hayes, had been a developer himself, smaller scale than Jonathan but successful. He'd bought the Connecticut property in 1987 as an investment, planning to build a family compound there someday. But he died suddenly in 1999, and Victoria had inherited everything, including a portfolio of properties she'd barely understood at the time. She'd been grieving, lost. When she'd met Jonathan a year later, she'd been so focused on the future, on building a new life, that she hadn't paid attention to the details of her inheritance. Her father's attorney had managed everything for her. Taxes, maintenance, all of it handled quietly in the background. When Jonathan had found the Connecticut estate in 2002, beautiful, perfect, exactly what he wanted, Victoria had been thrilled. It feels like fate, she'd said. My father would have loved this place. Jonathan had negotiated the purchase directly with the previous owner, who'd built the house and made improvements, but hadn't owned the underlying land. The structure, the gardens, the stables, all of that was for sale. The land itself had never been part of the transaction. Because the land belonged to Victoria Hayes, Jonathan's attorneys had never checked the deed history properly. They'd seen the property listing, seen the structures for sale, and assumed, that word again, assumed that the seller owned everything. Assumed that land and structures were a package deal. Assumed that due diligence meant getting a clean title for the buildings. They'd never checked who owned the dirt beneath those buildings. And Victoria, young and in love and trusting, hadn't mentioned it. She thought they were buying a home together. She thought her inheritance would be their inheritance, just as his business was their business. She'd signed the deed over to a trust, the Hayes Family Trust, for tax purposes, on advice from her father's attorney. Jonathan had known about the trust vaguely, but he'd never asked for details. It was her family's legal matter, not his concern. Over the years, as the marriage had soured, Victoria had gradually understood what she had. What Jonathan didn't know he didn't have. And she kept quiet, waiting, planning. The prenuptial agreement Jonathan loved to cite? It protected his business assets, his investments, his money. But it didn't address Victoria's separate property. Why would it? She'd come into the marriage with nothing of significance. Or so he believed. The divorce settlement giving her no claim to any properties owned by Reed Enterprises? Perfectly legal. She'd signed it willingly, because the estate wasn't owned by Reed Enterprises. The structures were. The improvements were. But the land, the 50 acres of prime, incredibly valuable land, was owned by the Hayes Family Trust, which was controlled entirely by Victoria Hayes. Jonathan lived in a house on land he didn't own. Land he'd never owned. Land Victoria could, theoretically, do whatever she wanted with, including terminate his tenancy. She closed the laptop and finished her coffee. Her hands were shaking slightly, but not from fear, from anticipation. From the delicious, terrible knowledge of what was coming. Jonathan had kicked her out of his mansion. He was about to learn that the mansion was built on her land, and she was about to kick him off of it. Gerald's office was in a converted brownstone in Park Slope, sandwiched between a yoga studio and a coffee shop that served $8 lattes. It was a far cry from the gleaming towers of Manhattan where Jonathan's attorneys practiced. But it felt real, solid, like justice might actually happen here. Victoria climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor and found Gerald waiting in his office, reading glasses perched on his nose, surrounded by stacks of papers and law books. He looked up when she entered and smiled. "The woman of the hour," he said. "Sit, we have a lot to discuss." Diane was there too, laptop open, looking fierce and focused. "Morning, Victoria. Ready to go to war?" "I'd been ready for 3 years," Victoria said, sitting in one of the worn leather chairs. "Tell me the plan." Gerald leaned back, fingers steepled. "It's elegant, really. Poetically, just... Here's what we do. First, we send Jonathan a formal notice informing him that the land beneath the estate is owned by you personally through the Hayes Family Trust, and that he has been occupying your property without a lease or rental agreement. He'll think it's a bluff," Victoria said. "He will, which is why step 2 is filing a formal eviction notice with the county court. We'll include all the supporting documentation, the deed, the trust papers, the proof that his 2002 purchase never included the land, just the structures. Can he fight it?" Victoria asked. "He'll try," Diane said, scrolling through her notes. "He'll claim implied tenancy, or that you knew about the situation and didn't object. Therefore, you waived your rights. His attorneys will throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. But none of it will stick," Gerald continued, "because the law is very clear. He never acquired the land. Period. His purchase was for structures only. You never signed any document giving him land rights. You never received compensation for land use. There's no lease, no rental agreement. No easement, nothing." "What about the prenup?" Victoria asked. "Can he claim that gave him rights to my property?" Gerald shook his head. "The prenup specifies that separate property remains separate. It was designed to protect his assets, but it works both ways. Your inheritance is your separate property. The trust documents are crystal clear. He has no claim. So what happens when the eviction is approved?" "That's the beautiful part," Diane said, and she actually smiled. "He'll have to remove his structures from your land. The house. The guest house. The stables. All of it. Either move them, which is functionally impossible, or demolish them." Victoria felt her breath catch. "Demolish. Or," Gerald said softly, he can negotiate with you. Pay you fair market value for the land, which, as of this morning's appraisal, is approximately $47 million, plus back rent for 23 years of unauthorized occupancy. Diane, what did we calculate that at? Diane consulted her laptop. Using fair market rent values for similar properties, adjusted for inflation and calculated over 23 years. Approximately $31 million. Victoria did the math silently. $78 million. Jonathan would have to pay her $78 million, or lose the estate entirely. He'll never pay, she said. He'd rather burn it down than give me that satisfaction. Then he burns it down, Gerald said. And you sell the land to someone else. Developers are already circling Diane, sent out some quiet inquiries. Your 50 acres, with water views? You could get $50 million, maybe more. Build your own empire, Victoria. On your terms. She sat there, processing it all. 23 years of her life reduced to legal documents and dollar figures. But it wasn't really about the money. It had never been about the money. It was about Jonathan's face when he realized. When he understood that the invisible woman he'd discarded actually held the deed to his kingdom. When he learned that his arrogance, his assumptions, his failure to see her as anything more than an accessory had cost him everything. How long? Victoria asked. How long until we can file? We can file tomorrow, Gerald said. The documents are ready. But Victoria, I need you to be sure. Once we do this, it's war. Jonathan will come after you with everything he has. He'll try to destroy you. Publicly, privately, every way he can. Let him try, Victoria said. I'm already destroyed. He made sure of that. Now it's his turn. Gerald and Diane exchanged a glance. Then Gerald nodded. All right then. Diane, prepare the filing. We go tomorrow morning? Victoria stood. She felt lighter somehow, as if a weight she'd been carrying for decades had finally lifted. Thank you. Both of you. Don't thank us yet, Diane said. Thank us when you're standing on your land, watching him pack his things. Victoria smiled. It was the first genuine smile she'd felt in years. I'll bring champagne, she said. The process server delivered the notice to Jonathan at his office on a Tuesday morning. Victoria wasn't there to see his reaction, but she imagined it. The confusion, the irritation. The moment he read the words, Hayes Family Trust, and land ownership, and eviction notice. The way his face would have flushed red. The way his jaw would have tightened. He called her 17 times that day. She didn't answer. She'd blocked his main number, but he'd found other phones. His office line, Rebecca's cell. Numbers she didn't recognize. She deleted each voicemail without listening. On Wednesday, Patricia Holbrook, his attorney, called Gerald's office. The conversation was brief and professional. Your client's claim is absurd, Patricia had said, according to Gerald's report. Mr. Reed has owned that property for 23 years. Mr. Reed has owned the structures, Gerald had replied calmly, not the land. The documentation is quite clear. This is harassment. We'll fight this. Please do. We welcome litigation. Discovery should be fascinating. By Thursday, the local news had picked up the story. Not the major networks, not yet, but the Connecticut papers and some regional outlets. Billionaire developer may not own estate's land, read one headline. Messy divorce gets messier for real estate mogul, read another. Victoria read them on her laptop in the Brooklyn apartment, curled up on the futon with her instant coffee. She felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even anger. Just a strange, hollow calm. Gerald called Friday morning. It's escalating. Jonathan's attorneys are filing an emergency motion to block the eviction. They're claiming fraud, claiming you knew about the land situation and deliberately concealed it during the divorce. I never concealed anything, Victoria said. I just didn't volunteer information he never asked for. That's what we'll argue. The hearing is Monday. Can you be there? I'll be there. That evening, her phone rang again. A new number. Against her better judgment, she answered. Victoria, Jonathan's voice. Cold, furious. What the hell do you think you're doing? She almost hung up, but something stopped her. Maybe she wanted to hear him plead. Maybe she wanted to hear him angry. Maybe she just wanted him to finally acknowledge her existence as something more than a convenient accessory. Hello, Jonathan, she said calmly. This is insane. You don't own that land. You can't possibly. I do own it, she interrupted. I inherited it from my father in 1999, the Hayes Family Trust. You never checked. Your attorneys never checked. You assumed. Silence. She could hear him breathing. Could imagine him pacing in his study, the one with the locked door where he'd made all those private calls. You're doing this because you're angry, he said finally. About Rebecca, about the divorce. I understand. But this is beneath you, Victoria. This is vindictive. Vindictive, she repeated. That's an interesting word. I gave you 23 good years. You gave me nothing, she cut him off, and now there was heat in her voice. I gave you 23 years. I built your home. I supported your career. I made you look good to your investors, your clients, your friends. I stood beside you at every event, every gala, every board meeting. I was perfect for you. And the moment I wasn't useful anymore, you threw me away. That's not. You called me an investment that didn't pay off, Jonathan. I heard you. 3 months ago, on the phone in your study. You told someone I don't know who, probably Rebecca, that I was dead weight and you needed to cut losses. More silence. You didn't think I knew, Victoria continued. You didn't think I heard, because you've never really looked at me. I've been invisible in my own marriage for a decade. So yes, this is vindictive. Because you destroyed me slowly, carefully, over 23 years. And now I'm returning the favor. Quickly. You won't win this, Jonathan said, his voice low and dangerous. I have the best attorneys in the state. I have resources. You have a house on my land, Victoria said. That's what you have. And unless you want to relocate that house, all 12,000 square feet of it, you're going to need to negotiate with me. I'll bury you in court. I'll drag this out for years. You'll run out of money before I do. Maybe. But every day this drags out. You're living on land you don't own, in a house that might be demolished. How will that look to your investors, your board? Your precious Rebecca? Think of the press, Jonathan. Billionaire developer doesn't own his own home. That'll be great for business. She heard something crash in the background. He'd thrown something. Good. I'll make you a deal, she said, her voice softening into something almost sweet. You pay me fair market value for the land, plus back rent for the years you've been trespassing. My attorneys calculated it at $78 million. Considering the estate is worth well over $100 million with all your improvements, that's actually quite reasonable. $78 million. He laughed, but it sounded broken. You're insane. Or you can fight me in court. And lose. And then I'll sell the land to someone else. Maybe they'll tear down your house and build condos. Wouldn't that be something? You bitter vindictive. She hung up. Her hands were shaking, but she felt exhilarated. Powerful. For the first time in decades, she'd spoken to Jonathan as an equal. Not as his wife. Not as his accessory. As his adversary. The phone rang again immediately. She blocked the number. Let him rage. Let him panic. Let him finally understand what it felt like to be powerless. The hearing on Monday was held in a county courthouse in Connecticut, a grand old building with marble floors and wooden benches worn smooth by generations of people seeking justice. Victoria arrived with Gerald and Diane. She wore a simple gray suit, professional, understated, the kind of thing that said, "I'm serious," without being flashy. Her hair was pulled back. No jewelry except her father's watch, the one she'd inherited along with the land. Jonathan arrived with an entourage. Patricia Holbrook and 2 other attorneys from her firm, a paralegal carrying boxes of documents. And Rebecca, surprisingly, hovering at Jonathan's elbow in a red dress that was far too dramatic for court. Victoria watched them enter. Jonathan looked haggard. His suit was expensive, but he wore it like armor. His eyes scanned the courtroom until they found hers, and for a moment they locked gazes. She didn't look away. She didn't flinch. She just watched him, calm and steady, until he broke first and turned to confer with his attorneys. Small victories. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Margaret Thornton, with steel-gray hair and a no-nonsense expression. She'd been on the bench for 25 years, according to Gerald, and had a reputation for cutting through legal nonsense. This is a preliminary hearing regarding the property dispute between Victoria Hayes and Jonathan Reed. Judge Thornton, continued 2:24 p.m. began, looking over her notes. Miss Hayes is claiming ownership of the land beneath Mr. Reed's estate and is seeking to evict him. Mr. Reed is contesting the claim. Let's hear arguments. Miss Holbrook, you first. Patricia stood, smoothing her skirt. Your Honor, this entire proceeding is absurd. Mr. Reed has owned and occupied the Connecticut estate for 23 years. He purchased it in good faith in 2002, with a clear title, and has made substantial improvements worth tens of millions of dollars. Ms. Hayes, who was his wife at the time of purchase and throughout their marriage, never once contested his ownership. She lived in the house. She benefited from it. To now claim that she secretly owned the underlying land all along is either fraud or a vindictive attempt to manipulate their divorce settlement. Your Honor, Gerald stood. Miss Hayes didn't secretly own anything. The land ownership has been a matter of public record since 1987, when her father, Thomas Hayes, purchased it. It passed to her upon his death in 1999. The Hayes Family Trust has paid property taxes on that land every year since. This is not a secret. It's simply a fact that Mr. Reed and his attorneys failed to discover during their due diligence when he purchased the structures in 2002. Judge Thornton frowned. Ms. Holbrook, are you claiming that Mr. Reed's purchase in 2002 included the land? We're claiming that there was an implied understanding. Do you have a deed showing Mr. Reed purchased the land? Patricia hesitated. The deed for the structures, not the land. Do you have any document showing Mr. Reed acquired land rights? No, Your Honor, but then what are we doing here? Judge Thornton looked genuinely puzzled. Mr. Morrison, do you have documentation proving your client owns the land? I do, Your Honor. Gerald nodded to Diane, who approached with a folder. The original 1987 deed from Hayes's purchase. The 1999 transfer to Victoria Hayes upon his death. The trust documents establishing the Hayes Family Trust with Victoria as sole trustee. And 23 years of property tax records showing continuous payment by the trust. Judge Thornton accepted the folder and spent several minutes reviewing it. The courtroom was silent. Victoria could hear her own heartbeat. Finally, the judge looked up. Ms. Holbrook, has your team reviewed these documents? We received copies last week, Your Honor. We believe... Do you dispute their authenticity? No, but do you have any documentation showing Mr. Reed acquired land rights at any point? No, Your Honor, but we believe that Ms. Hayes's silence during the marriage constitutes. Silence is not consent, Judge Thornton said sharply. And it's certainly not a property transfer. Mr. Reed built a house on land he didn't own. That was his error. Or his attorney's error. But it's an error nonetheless. Victoria felt her chest tighten. Was this happening? Was it really this simple? Patricia tried again. Your Honor, Mr. Reed has invested over $60 million in improvements to that property. If we allow this eviction to proceed, he'll lose everything. That can't be the intent of property law. The intent of property law, Judge Thornton said dryly, is to protect property owners. Which in this case is Ms. Hayes. Mr. Reed's investments, however significant, don't entitle him to someone else's land. She closed the folder. I'm granting the preliminary eviction notice. Mr. Reed has 90 days to either negotiate a purchase agreement with Ms. Hayes or remove his structures from her land. The courtroom erupted. Jonathan's attorneys immediately started objecting, talking over each other. Rebecca actually gasped, dramatic as a soap opera. Jonathan himself sat frozen, face white. Order! Judge Thornton's gavel came down hard. I've made my ruling. You can appeal if you wish, Ms. Holbrook, but I suggest your client focus on negotiating with Ms. Hayes. 90 days. That's generous. Dismissed. Gerald was grinning as they left the courtroom. Diane was practically bouncing. Did you see their faces? Oh my God, that was beautiful. Victoria felt numb. She'd won. The first round, at least. She'd actually won. Behind them, she heard Jonathan's voice raised in anger, arguing with his attorneys. She didn't turn around. She didn't need to see his face. She could imagine it perfectly. Outside, the press was waiting. A dozen reporters with cameras and microphones. They swarmed immediately. Miss Hayes. How do you respond to claims you hid assets during your divorce? Miss Hayes. What's your relationship with Mr. Reed now? Miss Hayes, are you doing this for revenge? Gerald stepped forward, professional and composed. Miss Hayes has no comment at this time. The court has ruled in her favor. The facts speak for themselves. Thank you. He guided her to a waiting car, not a limo, just a regular sedan, and they drove away from the courthouse, leaving the chaos behind. In the back seat, Victoria finally let herself feel it. The relief. The validation. The power. She'd been invisible for 23 years. Now everyone was looking at her. Victoria returned to New York on a Tuesday in March. She'd been gone for 4 months. Spring was beginning, trees budding, flowers emerging, the city shaking off winter's grip. The Brooklyn apartment felt different somehow, smaller, She'd outgrown it, she realized. Not because she needed something bigger or fancier, but because she was ready to create a real home, not a hiding place. A home. She started house hunting that week. Nothing extravagant, just something comfortable, maybe a townhouse, a garden, a place where she could host friends. She was rebuilding those relationships slowly and work on the foundation and live a real life. On Friday, Gerald called. "You need to see something," he said. "Can you come to the office?" "What is it?" "Just come. Trust me." She went. In Gerald's office, he had his laptop open to a news article. Connecticut estate owner files for bankruptcy. Victoria's breath caught. "Jonathan?" "Read it," she did. The article explained that Jonathan Reed had filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy for Reed Enterprises. The company had been hemorrhaging value since the divorce scandal. Major investors had pulled out. Contracts had been canceled. And the $40 million he'd paid for the land combined with legal fees, settlements, and stock losses had depleted his cash reserves. Reed Enterprises was being restructured. Assets were being sold, including, the article noted, the Connecticut estate. "He's selling it," Victoria said quietly. "He has to. It's one of his largest assets. The bankruptcy court is forcing liquidation." Victoria stared at the screen. The estate, her father's land, the house she'd decorated, the gardens she'd planned, all of it being sold to pay Jonathan's debts. "Who's buying it?" she asked. Gerald smiled. "That's the interesting part. The listing went up yesterday. Asking price, $85 million for the entire property, land, and structures. And guess who already submitted an offer?" "Who?" "A non-profit foundation," Gerald said. "The Hayes Foundation for Women's Independence, offering $60 million. All cash, closing in 30 days. Victoria stared at him. "What?" "You have $40 million, Victoria. The foundation is set up with its own capital and resources from other donors. Between your money and the foundation's, we can swing $60 million. We checked. It's viable. You want me to buy back the estate?" "I want you to consider it," Gerald said. "Think about it. The estate, owned by your foundation, turned into a retreat center for women leaving abusive marriages. Programs, workshops, counseling. A place where women can come to heal and learn and start over. A place where they can be visible again." Victoria felt her throat tighten. The estate. Her father's dream. Finally fulfilled. But not as a private compound, as something bigger, something that mattered. "The land is yours anyway," Diane added, appearing in the doorway. "You sold it to Jonathan, sure. But if he goes bankrupt and has to sell, you could buy it back. Buy the whole thing, land and buildings. And do something incredible with it." "Jonathan would hate that," Victoria said. "Yes," Gerald agreed. "He would. But this isn't about Jonathan anymore. This is about what you want to build. What kind of legacy you want to leave. Your father bought that land to create something for his family. You could create something for hundreds of families. Thousands, maybe." Victoria thought about the women she'd met traveling. The stories they'd shared, marriages that had crushed them. Partners who'd made them invisible. The slow, painful process of becoming themselves again. She thought about the estate. Those beautiful rooms, that kitchen where she'd planned menus, that garden where she'd planted roses. She thought about her father, who'd wanted to build something lasting, and she thought about herself. Who she'd been. Who she was becoming. "Make the offer," she said. The sale went through 8 weeks later. Jonathan, according to Patricia, who'd stayed in touch with Gerald professionally, was devastated. He'd tried to block the sale, arguing conflict of interest. But the bankruptcy court had ruled against him. The Hayes Foundation's offer was fair. The money would help pay his debts. The sale was approved. On the day of closing, Victoria drove to Connecticut. She parked in the circular driveway, her driveway now, and stepped out. The estate looked different in spring. The gardens were blooming, the trees were full. The house gleamed in the sunlight. She walked to the front door, unlocked it with her new key, stepped inside. The entryway, where she'd stood 23 years ago and said, "It feels like coming home," where Jonathan had said, "It's just a house. Real estate. Don't get sentimental." She stood there now, alone, and whispered, "You were wrong. It was always more than real estate. It was a dream. And now it's a dream that will actually help people." Footsteps behind her. She turned. A woman stood in the doorway, mid-30s, tired eyes, a suitcase in her hand. "I'm sorry," the woman said nervously. "The foundation said I should come today? For the first retreat session? But if it's not ready, It's ready, Victoria said, smiling. Come in. Welcome home. The woman looked confused. Home? For now, Victoria said. For as long as you need. That's what this place is now. A home for women who need to remember who they are. The woman's eyes filled with tears. I don't even know who I am anymore. You will, Victoria said gently. I promise. You will, 2 years later. The Hayes Foundation operated 3 retreat centers now. The Connecticut estate was the flagship, but there were 2 others, one in California, one in Colorado. They've helped over 500 women so far. Some stayed for weeks, some for months. All of them left stronger than they'd arrived. Victoria split her time between the centers and a townhouse she'd bought in Park Slope, near Gerald's office. She'd furnished it herself, no designer, no consultation with anyone. Just her taste, her choices, her home. She'd reconnected with old friends. Made new ones. Started dating, tentatively, nothing serious yet, but she was learning what she actually wanted in a partner. Someone who saw her. Someone who listened. Someone who understood that relationships were partnerships, not acquisitions. She'd learned to be alone without being lonely. She'd learned to be visible without needing validation. She'd learned, finally, to be herself. One afternoon, she received an email. The address was unfamiliar, but the subject line caught her attention. A thank you. She opened it. Dear Victoria, you don't know me, but I was at your Connecticut retreat center last year. I came there broken. My husband had spent 15 years making me feel worthless. I'd lost myself completely. The foundation gave me counseling, legal help, job training. But more than that, it gave me a place where I was seen, where I mattered. Where I could remember that I was a person, not just someone's wife. I left after 3 months with a job, an apartment, and hope. Real hope. I'm writing because I just finalized my divorce. And I wanted you to know. I stood up in court and told my story. I claimed my assets. I demanded respect. And I won. I won because you showed me it was possible. You showed me that being invisible doesn't have to be permanent. That we can reclaim our power. That we can be seen. Thank you for building something beautiful from your pain. Thank you for turning your story into something that helps others. Thank you for being visible, so that we could learn to be visible too. With gratitude, Jennifer M. Victoria read the email 3 times. Then she saved it in a folder she kept labeled Reasons. Reasons to keep going. Reasons it mattered. Reasons the pain had been worth it. She stood and walked to her window, looking out at Brooklyn, her neighborhood, her life. 23 years ago, she'd been a young woman at a charity gala, meeting a charming man who'd made her feel seen. 2 years ago, she'd been a ghost in a mansion, signing divorce papers while her husband smiled. Today she was Victoria Hayes, founder, philanthropist, a woman who'd learned that being broken wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Her phone rang. Gerald. Hey, she answered. What's up? Good news. We just got approval for the 4th center, Oregon. Beautiful property. Ocean views. That's wonderful. Also, Time magazine wants to do a profile on you. The most powerful woman you've never heard of? They're doing a series on quiet changemakers. Victoria smiled. I'm not quiet anymore. No, Gerald agreed. You're really not, so should I set it up? She thought about it. About being in a magazine, about being public, about being seen by millions of people. Once that thought would have terrified her. Now, set it up, she said. But on one condition. What's that? I want the article to focus on the women we've helped. Not on me. Not on Jonathan, or the divorce, or any of that. Just the women. Their stories. Their victories. They're the ones who matter. You matter too, Victoria. I know, she said. And she meant it. But I've been seen enough. Now it's someone else's turn. Somewhere in Manhattan, in a modest apartment far from the penthouse he used to own, Jonathan read the Time article about his ex-wife. The woman in the photos didn't look like the Victoria he remembered. She looked confident, radiant, happy. He read about the foundation. About the women it had helped. About the estate, his estate, now serving as a refuge for people rebuilding their lives. He set down the magazine. Rebecca was gone. She'd left 6 months after the bankruptcy, moving on to another wealthy man with better prospects. The company was slowly recovering, but he'd never regain what he'd lost. The reputation, the empire, the sense of invincibility. He'd learned, too late, what Victoria had tried to tell him, that people weren't furniture. That relationships required seeing the other person as real. That success built on someone else's erasure wasn't success at all. He picked up his phone, started to dial Victoria's number, then stopped. What would he say? I'm sorry? He'd already said that. I understand now. Too late for that to matter. The truth was, Victoria had moved on. She'd built something real from the ashes of their marriage. Something that mattered, and he was still standing in the ruins of his own arrogance, wondering how he'd gotten there. He put down the phone. Some lessons, he thought, came too late to do any good. Victoria never thought about Jonathan anymore. Oh, occasionally she'd see his name in business news. See that Reed Enterprises was rebuilding. See that he'd married again someone closer to his age, this time a fellow developer. She hoped, distantly, that he'd learned something, that he treated this woman better. But mostly she didn't think about him at all. She was too busy living, building, creating, helping, being visible in all the ways that mattered. Being seen by the people who counted the women at her retreats, the staff at her foundation, the friends who knew her story and loved her anyway. Being herself, finally, after 23 years of being someone else's accessory. One evening, standing in the Connecticut estate's garden, the roses she'd deplanted now blooming wild and free, a woman approached her. One of the retreat participants, young, maybe 25, scared eyes. Miss Hayes, can I ask you something? Of course. How did you do it? How did you survive losing everything? Victoria thought about that question. Really thought about it. I didn't lose everything, she said finally. I lost a husband who didn't value me. I lost a house that was never really mine. I lost a life that was killing me slowly. But I didn't lose everything, because I found myself. And that was worth more than anything I lost. The young woman considered this. But weren't you scared? Terrified, Victoria admitted. Every single day. I still am, sometimes. But I'd rather be scared and visible than comfortable and erased, wouldn't you? The woman smiled. A real smile. Yeah, I would. Then you're going to be fine, Victoria said. It won't be easy. But you're going to be fine. As the woman walked away, Victoria stayed in the garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The same colors as that evening 23 years ago when she'd stood in the entryway and felt like she was coming home. She'd been wrong then. This house had never been home. But now? Now it was home to dozens of women finding themselves. Now it was home to hope and healing and second chances. Now it was something that mattered. And Victoria? Victoria was finally home too. Not in a place, but in herself. She'd spent 23 years as Jonathan Reed's wife, invisible and erased. Visible. She'd spent 2 years fighting to be seen, to matter, to exist. And now? Now she was simply Victoria Hayes. Visible, powerful, free. And that, she thought as the last light faded from the sky, was worth every moment of pain. That was worth everything. 5 years after the foundation's opening, Victoria received a letter that changed everything one more time. It arrived on a Tuesday morning at her Park Slope townhouse, delivered by courier. The envelope was expensive, cream-colored, heavy stock. The return address made her pause. Reed and Associates Legal Counsel. Her first instinct was to throw it away. She'd moved on. She didn't need whatever this was, but curiosity won. Inside was a handwritten letter. Jonathan's handwriting, she recognized the aggressive slant, the impatient loops. Victoria, I know I have no right to contact you. I know you've moved on, built something remarkable, and probably never think about me anymore. But I need you to know something. I'm dying. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe less. I'm writing this because there are things I need to say, and I'm running out of time to say them. You were right about everything. I was selfish. I was blind. I treated you like an object, not a person. I built an empire and lost the only thing that actually mattered, a real partnership with someone who genuinely cared about me. Rebecca left, as you probably know. The second wife left too when the money got tight again. I'm alone now, facing the end, and I finally understand what you tried to tell me. Success means nothing if you re-surrounded by people who only love what you can give them, not who you are. I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm writing because I need you to know that the foundation, what you built from the wreckage of our marriage, is the most meaningful thing that ever came from my life. Not Reed Enterprises. Not the buildings or the deals or the money. The fact that my mistakes led, somehow, to something that helps people. I've established a trust. $50 million. It goes to the Hayes Foundation when I die. No strings. No conditions. Just my attempt to do one good thing before I go. I'm also leaving you something else. Something I should have given you 23 years ago. Thank you for teaching me, even if I learned too late, Jonathan. Victoria read the letter 3 times, hands trembling. He was dying. She felt, what? Not grief, exactly. Not for Jonathan, but sadness, perhaps, for the waste of it all. For the man he could have been if he'd learned these lessons earlier. For the years they'd both lost to his arrogance and her invisibility. She called Gerald immediately. I got a letter from Jonathan, she said. He says he's dying. Says he's leaving money to the foundation. I know, Gerald said quietly. His attorney contacted me last week. Wanted to verify the foundation's legal status. Victoria, he's serious. 50 million. The paperwork is already drawn up. Why would he do this? Redemption, maybe? Legacy? Or maybe he finally understood what you built and wants to be part of it, even posthumously. Victoria was quiet for a long moment. The letter says he's leaving me something else. Something personal. Do you know what it is? No, but his attorney mentioned you might want to visit him. He's at a hospice facility in Greenwich. He asked if you'd come. Why would I do that? I don't know, Gerald said. But Victoria, you've spent 5 years building something beautiful. You've healed. You've helped hundreds of women heal. Maybe this is the final piece. Not for him, for you. True closure. 3 days later, Victoria drove to Greenwich. The hospice facility was elegant, more like a boutique hotel than a medical facility. Private rooms, gardens, the kind of place where wealthy people went to die comfortably. Jonathan's room was on the 2nd floor, overlooking a garden where spring flowers bloomed in organized beds. He looked terrible. The Jonathan Reed she'd known had been tall, imposing, full of aggressive energy. This man was shrunken, gray. His expensive pajamas hung loose on a frame that had lost 40 pounds. But his eyes, those blue eyes, were still sharp. Victoria! His voice was raspy. You came. I almost didn't. I wouldn't have blamed you. He gestured weakly to a chair beside the bed. Sit, please. She sat, maintaining distance. Old habits. Thank you for the donation, she said. The foundation will use it well. I know you will. He smiled faintly. I've been following your work. The Time article. The expansion to 7 centers now. The partnerships with legal aid organizations. You've helped over 2,000 women, Victoria. 2,000 lives changed because you refused to stay invisible. Why am I here, Jonathan? He reached toward his knitstand, movements slow and painful. He pulled out a small wooden box, old, worn, clearly valuable. This belonged to your father, he said. Victoria's breath caught. What? Thomas Hayes and I met once, did you know that? Before you and I met. I was 26, just starting out. He was an investor I was trying to court for a development project. He turned me down, said I was too focused on profits and not enough on people. He was right, obviously. Jonathan opened the box. Inside was a letter, yellowed with age, and a small key. He gave me this before he died. Sighed, if you ever marry my daughter, give this to her on your 10th anniversary. Tell her I was proud of the woman she became. I was supposed to give it to you 13 years ago, Victoria. I forgot, or I didn't think it mattered. I don't know which is worse. Victoria took the box with shaking hands. You kept it all this time? It was in my safe. I found it 2 months ago when I was going through my affairs, preparing ... He gestured vaguely at himself. Preparing for this. I realized I'd stolen something else from you. Not just years, not just dignity, but this, your father's final words to you. Victoria opened the letter. Her father's handwriting strong, steady, so different from Jonathan's aggressive scrawl. My dearest Victoria, if you're reading this, it means you've married that young man, Jonathan Reed. I hope he's treated you well. I hope he's learned that true success isn't measured in buildings or bank accounts, but in how you treat the people you love. If he hasn't learned that, I hope you've been strong enough to demand better. You come from a long line of strong women, Victoria. Your grandmother survived the Depression. Your mother survived loss and built a life anyway. And you have the strength of both of them in you. Never make yourself small for anyone. Never let anyone dim your light. Never forget that you matter not because of what you do for others, but because of who you are. The key in this box opens a safety deposit box at First National Bank, account number 7734B. Inside, you'll find documents for a trust I established for you. Not money, you'll have plenty of that from my estate. But something more important. The deed to 50 acres in Connecticut. Land I bought for our family. For you. Build something beautiful there, sweetheart. Build something that matters. Build something that would make your old dad proud. I love you, I'm proud of you. And I know, whatever life brings, you'll face it with courage and grace. Always, Dad. Victoria's vision blurred with tears. 25 years. She'd had this letter waiting for her for 25 years, and Jonathan had kept it locked away. I'm sorry, Jonathan whispered. I'm so sorry. She looked up at him. This dying man who'd once been her husband. Who'd erased her and then, inadvertently, forced her to find herself again. He knew, she said softly. My father knew I owned the land. He planned it. He wanted me to have it, to build something that mattered, and I did. Just not the way he imagined. Better than he imagined, Jonathan said. Victoria, I need to tell you something. In my will, beyond the 50 million, I'm leaving you one more thing. The last thing I own that matters. What? My shares in Reed Enterprises. Controlling interest. 65%. Victoria stared at him. That's insane. Why would you? Because you'll do something good with it, he said simply. You'll steer the company toward projects that matter. Buildings that help people, not just make money. You'll turn my legacy into something worth having. I trust you to do that because you were the only person who ever saw past the empire to ask if it meant anything. I don't want your company, Jonathan. I know, but those 2,000 women you've helped? They deserve more than 7 retreat centers. They deserve jobs, training programs, affordable housing. Reed Enterprises can provide that with the right person leading it. Be that person, Victoria. Take my empire and turn it into something your father would be proud of. Victoria felt overwhelmed. The letter. The key. The company. It was too much. Why now? She asked. Why, when you're dying, do you finally see clearly? Because dying focuses the mind, Jonathan said with a weak laugh. Because I'm finally facing the truth. I built a kingdom, but I lived in it alone. You build a community, and you're surrounded by people who actually love you. I know which legacy I'd rather leave. They sat in silence for a while. Outside, birds sang in the garden. Inside, machines beeped softly, counting down the days Jonathan had left. I forgive you, Victoria said finally. Jonathan's eyes widened. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, but I'm choosing to, not because you earned it. But because I'm tired of carrying anger, I'm letting it go. All of it. A tear slid down Jonathan's cheek. Thank you. Victoria stood. I'll think about the company. No promises. But I'll think about it. That's all I ask. She moved toward the door, then paused. Jonathan, for what it's worth, I hope you find peace. Real peace. Not the kind that comes from success or money, but the kind that comes from knowing you tried, at the end, to do something right. I hope so too, he said quietly. Victoria left the hospice and drove back to Brooklyn. She pulled over twice to cry for her father, for Jonathan, for the 23 years she'd lost, for the life she'd found. When she got home, she opened her laptop and drafted an email to Gerald. I want to accept Jonathan's bequest. The money and the company shares. But here's what we're going to do with Reed Enterprises. We're pivoting. Affordable housing developments. Community centers. Projects that employ and train the women from our foundation programs. We're turning a profit-driven empire into a force for actual good. My father wanted me to build something beautiful on that land. I did. Now I'm going to build something beautiful with Jonathan's company too. Not as revenge, not as victory, but as transformation. Because that's what we do. We take broken things and make them whole again. Let's get started. She hit send, then sat back and looked at her father's letter one more time. I did it, Dad, she whispered. I built something that matters. And I'm not done yet. Outside her window, Brooklyn hummed with life. Her life. Her city. Her future. Victoria Hayes was visible now. And she was just getting started.